An exclusive look into the leftist hoax machine and how it keeps churning out fake fodder. All this talk about police brutality, is America having the right conversation? Or have we been led down a bunny trail? And Panera Bread teaches us everything we need to know about socialism. All this and more on this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback.
Truth is making a comeback. America's Top Stories with Lisa K. Donner.
There's been endless talk about fake news since the election of Donald J. Trump. But what if the real issue goes much deeper than that? What if the fake news is just a symptom of the real problem? And that is the crumbling relationship that many on the left are having with the truth. We have borne witness to this in recent days with the disintegrating tale woven by TV actor Jussie Smollett, who claims he was assaulted by Trump supporters one night in Chicago. And as the story unravels, it tells an ugly tale of deception and lies. But a bigger question remains. How has the leftist media used one hoax after another to foster hatred and bigotry toward those who support the president? Moreover, are these attacks aimed at Mr. Trump, the so-called deplorables, or both? And has this campaign of falsehoods and deceit been effective in painting the president and his followers as thoroughly racist? I've invited Liberty Nation's chief Washington columnist, Tim Donner. And yes, we're related, and we've been working together for a long time. So Tim is joining us to discuss this topic. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time researching this story to uncover what you believe to be a lengthy pattern of anti-Trump hoaxes that have captured the media attention since the election of Trump. Let's go through a few of these. How about we start with someone by the name of William Tucker?
Well, Mr. Tucker was arrested by Philadelphia police for vandalizing multiple vehicles and homes the day after Trump was elected. He'd had written messages like Trump rules and Black BITCH on an African-American woman's car, and also allegedly spray painted Trump's name next to a Nazi swastika on a storefront window. So he didn't take any half measures in making clear what low-life scum he believes that Trump supporters are.
You also mentioned a situation involving Babson College students.
Yeah, there were a couple of students at Babson College who drove through Wellesley College in Massachusetts the night that Trump won. They were celebrating Trump's victory, and other students claimed that those two harassed onlookers and spit and yelled slurs at anti-Trump students, but police found no evidence to support the hate crime claims.
Now let's go to Villanova.
Yes, this was another of the 15 incidents that I've chronicled in the LibertyNation.com story. A Black female student at Villanova University, which is in Philadelphia, alleged that after Trump's victory, a group of white men knocked her to the ground as they yelled Trump. The woman later was forced to drop the charges and asked the campus police and local authorities to shut down their investigations when it became obvious that it was a complete hoax.
Is it just me, or do a lot of these hoaxes seem to be happening on college campuses?
Well, a lot of them have happened on college campuses, which is understandable given the neo-Marxist indoctrination that they're getting on campuses and the palpable hatred for Trump and anybody who supports him in academia. There were 15 documented hoaxes altogether, which I chronicled in the story, and many of them were on college campuses. Many of the other ones, by the way, were by Muslim women who claimed that their hijab had been grabbed or vandalized, or that they'd been ridiculed. All of those stories turned out to be completely fabricated.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I read your story, I thought the same thing, that there were a lot of Muslim women involved in these hoaxes. But you write in your article, quote, But since most of these false stories garnered spectacular headlines, they prove that the left's belief in narrative over facts represent a clear and present danger to America. For, as it once was said, and is especially true in this global internet age, a lie travels around the globe while the truth is putting on its shoes, unquote. Any final thoughts?
Well, inevitably, the story of this kind of hate crime occurring grabs a lot more headlines than the story saying, well, wait, never mind, it turned out to be a hoax. And what it does, what these 15 at least hoaxes that are meant to demonize Trump supporters, what they do is they set a narrative. And the left has decided that the narrative is more important than facts. See, facts don't matter on the left anymore. It's what the narrative is. And in the hoaxes, all of which drew headlines, as I said, the corrections to it, or the fact that they turned out to be hoaxes, didn't gather nearly as much attention. So it's narrative over facts. And I think what we're seeing is a very, very dangerous and insidious trend, Lisa, which is that in a major part of our political culture, facts no longer matter. Think about the consequences of that.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because when I saw your article, I thought often the correction is not nearly as highlighted as the actual story, whether that was true or not.
And the newspaper analogy is that the reported hate crime gets on page A1, and the fact that it's a hoax is listed days later on maybe page A17. So compare the coverage and figure the narrative that the left has built from really before Trump elected, but they never thought he would actually win. But when he did, how true can the narrative that Trump is truly evil along with his supporters, how true can that be if they're resorting to fabricating stories to undergird the narrative?
Right, but in essence, you bring up a lot of hoaxes that really aren't meant to make Trump look bad. They're meant to make his supporters look bad. So are we dealing with trying to make those who like Trump and believe he's a good president into that basket of deplorables that are so irredeemable?
I think for the first 6 months to a year of the Trump presidency, the leftist elite media focused on Trump himself because I think they believed that somehow, some way they could take him down. Now that it appears evident that they can't do that, what they've done is they've shifted over the last several months or year to demonizing Trump supporters, basically saying that, you don't get a pass if you voted for Trump. You can't say you voted for Trump because you liked his economic policies or whatever, and you overlooked his obviously racist tendencies. No, if you voted for Trump, then you too are a racist, and you cannot escape that. We've seen that assigned particularly to white women. Kirsten Powers went on CNN and said, white women that said, oh, they voted for Trump for some other reason than his social views, who think they can get away with saying they're not racist. No, in fact, they are racist. So they've turned their attention from Trump himself to the basket of deplorables that voted for him.
Well, I've actually written an article on LibertyNation.com about how white women and conservative women are really taking the heat. And I expect them to take even more in 2020. Thanks very much, Tim Donner, LibertyNation.com. Wonderful article, Tim. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Panera, the ultra-successful maker of overpriced bread, has finally learned after 9 years the economic principle, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So writes economic correspondent Andrew Moran. And in a way, Panera's failure at giving free lunches and freebies is a teachable moment regarding socialism and why it never has and never will work. Joining me now to discuss the Panera Bread debacle is Liberty Nation's Andrew Moran. Dare I ask how cold it is in Toronto today, sir?
Well, I know I use this joke a lot, but it's so cold outside that I saw an old man's teeth chatter in the glass jar.
Okay. For those who are not familiar with Panera's economic and social experiment, can you give our viewers a synopsis of the program here?
And so Panera Bread, it's that company that bakes overpriced bread. You get a loaf and it costs you $10. They launched a series of Panera Cares. These are restaurants established in Boston, Portland, and Dearborn, Michigan, and they have a pay what you can business model. So customers, they go to the restaurant, they order what they want, and then they pay whatever they wish. So they could pay nothing at all, they could pay more than a fair share, or they could pay just a few bucks.
So they tried this in different regions of the country, from Portland to Chicago to Boston, and in every instance, Panera Cares failed miserably. Why?
Well, as anyone could predict, it failed because it was only able to recoup about 60% of its total costs. Now, if you run a restaurant, that's something to sneeze at. So they were unable to pay for the food, the leasing, the labor, and everything else that is involved with owning and operating a restaurant. And so what the issue was, according to local reports, when customers would visit the restaurant, they would mob it. So they would order as much as they could. The homeless, they would frequent the restaurant for every single meal they needed. And then, of course, patrons would just pay only a few dollars for one of these expensive meals.
And you mentioned students, too.
Correct. Yes, students, they would go there to study, they would go there to use the internet, and then they would just order whatever they wanted. And what was interesting was the entitlement. When management, when they would try to act and inform them that they were abusing the system, all these reviews online were saying, oh, they were so rude, and how dare they tell us, how dare they turn this place into a toxic environment. It's quite absurd, because they're doing actually a generous thing of giving, you order, let's say, a burger, and you pay what, $1 for it, or nothing at all. I mean, you should be pretty grateful for such a business model.
So you write in your article about the tragedy of the commons. Can you put that into the context of what happened to the Pilgrims?
So when the Pilgrims landed in America, they established communal farming on the suggestion of the man who funded the Mayflower. He was a wealthy iron merchant. And so what happened was, you had public property, and all the farmers, they would converge onto this land, and they would overgraze it. So the land eventually became unfit to use and unfit to cultivate. And then when the land became unfit to cultivate, people would starve. So, and then also they would steal from their neighbors. They would eat crops that were unfit to eat. And then the other issue was that people would be lazy. They wouldn't work. So when there was land to cultivate, they wouldn't do it, because they would rely on their neighbors or friends or their brothers, wives, cousins, best friend to help feed them.
So what can we learn from the Pilgrims and Panera Bread? What is our teachable moment here?
Well, I think in the context, it's the same thing that happened at Panera. So Panera, they offered, let's say, free food for everyone, and people would go to the restaurant and just take whatever they could. They wouldn't care about if the company was able to sustain its business model, and they would be indifferent to if the company would survive in a few years. They just focused on getting what theirs right now at that very moment, without thinking of the consequences. So eventually the model had to shut down, and the very last one, which was in Boston, no longer exists. So this good business model no longer exists because people, they abuse it, and that was Panera's tragedy of the commons.
Thank you. That's Andrew Moran from LibertyNation.com, reporting from Toronto. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you.
We hear endlessly about police brutality from the advocacy media, and especially that police brutality is fueled by rampant racism in America. But is America having the right conversation about this matter? That's the question that Jeff Charles asks in an article for LibertyNation.com this week. Jeff joins us now to discuss this. Jeff, I want to jump right in, because you say that the media constantly focuses on the race issue rather than the violence issue, and that this causes us to keep going around the same flagpole without trying to solve the real problem here. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is basically, when there's a legitimate case of police brutality, the media only covers it from a racial perspective. So what that means is that basically they only cover the cases in which black men are victimized. And these stories are the ones that receive nationwide attention. The reason for this is that they want to push the racial angle rather than paying more attention to the fact that an officer of the law abused his power. So in this way, they inflame racial tensions and they perpetuate the narrative that they want to perpetuate. Basically, that America is a racist nation and that police are in the streets hunting down black people and everything is going to hell. But the facts reveal a little bit something different. And the racial narrative just serves as a distraction from what we should really be focused on.
So that really brings us to the question, what do the statistics tell us about police shootings in America?
Yeah, so for instance, last year, there were 18 unarmed black men that were killed in police shootings. There were 23 unarmed whites that were killed and 6 Hispanics. So the thing is, with the studies, there are all types of statistics and all types of studies that have been done on this issue. And a lot of them conflict. Some studies show that unarmed black men are more likely to be shot. Other studies show something different. But the bottom line is that the one thing that these studies have in common, as far as the results, is that there are cases where Americans are being victimized by police officers. Now, I'm going to add a caveat to that. In a lot of these situations, there are situations where the suspect puts the police officer's life in danger. So a lot of them are justified shootings, whether the suspect is unarmed or whether the person is armed. But there are plenty of cases involving brutality where there's a shooting or whether the police officer just used excessive force that was more than what was needed to apprehend the suspect. So this is something that is happening, and it is an issue that needs to be addressed.
You say that major news outlets, typically the legacy media, they push these stories to exacerbate ethnic tensions and paint a picture of racist America. What are the effects of this kind of reportage on the black community as well as the white community?
The problem is that the impact is that it inflames racial tensions. It causes more resentment. It causes more hate between minorities and whites. And the bottom line is that nobody really knows what is inside the minds of the officers that perform these acts. In some cases, it's on accident. Sometimes they're just abusing their authority. We don't know if it's because they're racist or not. So the reality is that the racial issue, since we can't read minds, it would be better to focus on what the real issue is, and that's the few police officers who abuse their authority are not being held accountable. So it has an impact on race relations. It also has an impact on the good police officers. The majority of police officers would never do something like shoot a Philando Castile or a Daniel Shaver from last year. But the small amount that do perform these acts are making the rest look bad. So it really has horrible consequences all around, and focusing only on the racial aspect distracts from the other ramifications.
Right. So what's really going on here is that the media is working hard to influence rather than inform. And when they do that, it hampers our ability to get to the bottom of the issue. Isn't that correct?
That is exactly correct. I mean, the job of the press used to be and should still be to expose government corruption and to make sure that the American public is informed on the issues that are important. The problem is now the media is being selective in what they report in an effort to promote a certain narrative. That's why you only hear about black men unarmed being shot by the police, but you don't hear about somebody like Daniel Shaver, a white man who was shot by police. He was unarmed, and many people agreed that that was a bad shoot. This happens far too often, and the thing is, what would happen if the media were to report on every single instance and give it nationwide attention? Well, in that case, you've got black, white, Hispanic, everybody coming together to solve the problem. The narrative that the media is pushing is divisive, and it's designed to be divisive. When people are united, they can affect real change, and government officials who have the authority to take away our rights will be held accountable when they do so unjustly.
Let me ask you this final question, and that is, what do they gain by painting a racist America?
Well, I mean, we know that the establishment media leans to the left. Most of their journalists are Democrats. And really, by promoting this narrative, they're able to convince more minority voters to vote for them rather than for conservatives who don't peddle in identity politics in the way that the left does. So in this way, they use it to divide, but also to manipulate. And so by promoting the message that America is a racist nation that hates blacks and Hispanics and Asians, using fear, they're able to manipulate these individuals into supporting them. So basically, it's a political agenda. It has to do with getting more votes.
Right. And don't you think that this, I mean, one of the things that you have been beating the drum about for a long time on LibertyNation.com is that they try to constantly promote a narrative of victimhood among the black community. And that doesn't really help the situation, does it?
No, it doesn't. But here's the thing. If you can convince somebody that they're a victim and that they have to depend on you, you don't really have to do anything more than that. But the thing is, if they want to be the party or be seen as the group who cares about the victim, they have to keep people victimized, which means that they have to constantly push this message. If the problem of police brutality got solved, then there would be no need, there would be no way for them to use these situations to inflame racial tensions and to divide us further. So basically, it's nothing more than a manipulation tool.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very enlightening, Jeff. I appreciate your honesty and your perspectives and your articles on LibertyNation.com. That's author Jeff Charles, Media Affairs Correspondent. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thanks, Lisa.
And now for this week's parting shot. Like a battered woman who keeps returning to her abusive husband, Bernie Sanders officially announced that he wants to finish what he started in 2016 by seeking the Democratic nomination for president. There are a couple of problems with this. Number one, Bernie is not a Democrat, something no doubt the DNC noticed last time, and perhaps was reason enough for them to tilt the scales toward Hillary Clinton. But this time around, the optics reveal a different and, yes, openly socialist Democratic Party. What all this essentially comes down to is that Mr. Sanders is no longer a socialist facing down the party establishment, but rather he is merely one of the many socialist faces in the crowd. Can the Vermont senator rekindle that People's Revolution mojo he began in 2016? At this point, about the only thing different about Sanders in the Democratic field is that he is a white male. And once former Vice President Joe Biden throws his hat in the ring, Sanders won't even have that. Not that being the white male candidate for the Democratic Party brings one a great deal of support. All of society's problems, according to Mr. Sanders and friends, can be solved if we just learn to share. If we can't be taught to allocate a portion of our stuff to others, then of course we must be compelled to do so. The premise being that if we were not required to give, no one would. Out of this schoolyard mentality come programs like Bernie's Medicare for All. Bernie Sanders believes firmly that everyone should have everything, until, of course, everyone has nothing. Cue the Venezuela videotape, please.
The office, where you used to work as an accountant, it's now empty, abandoned, overtaken by squatters, people like you who lost everything, who limp a little more each day toward their death. Men all in black now patrol the streets with shotguns. You're a bag of bones. Bones jutting out like false teeth. At times, You think about all the energy you waste just breathing.
Still, you can't count Bernie out. He fired up a lot of folks last time and likely has a solid base of support that is not eroded. Sanders and friends certainly have unfinished business, and at the very least, it will be interesting to see if his message breaks through the socialist class ceiling and engenders the support of a large majority of the American people. And that's my parting shot. And that's it for this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback. I'm Lisa K. Donner. Don't forget to like us, subscribe, and stop by our website, libertynation.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and remember, liberty all the time and everywhere. Have a great week.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at libertynation.com.